one ship was able to freeze global trade.
We want love, we want peace, we want equality!
There are
A traditional recipe, and it's really very delicious.
It's code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening. Wildfires, floods, and hurricanes. Extreme climate events warn of impending doom. Is the world heading towards a climate catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all. If you fail to prove us wrong, God help us.
One trillion species. 7.8 billion humans. 1.9 million species extinct. One planet. Where are we heading? What should we do?
Watch Climate Tracker, only on WION. World is one.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper, and these are the top stories of the hour. Negotiations between Russia and NATO over security guarantees will take place in Brussels on January the 12th, following the talks between Russian and US delegations in Geneva on January the 10th. Iran says talks on salvaging the 2015 nuclear deal are going in the right direction, and that agreement is possible if other parties show good faith and seriousness. The Pakistan NSA Moeed Youssef terms clearance of national security policy a historic moment, says the citizen-centric policy, with economic security at its core, will be pursued earnestly. An Israeli airstrike hits Syria's Latakia port, sparking a fire that lights up the Mediterranean seafront in the second such attack on the key cargo hub this month. The United States halves the isolation period for asymptomatic COVID cases in a bid to blunt mass Omicron-induced disruption, as infections hit new highs in multiple US states and in Europe. The Taliban reportedly used gunfire into the air to disperse women protesters in Kabul, who were protesting against the killing of members of the former regime and calling for women's rights. Coronavirus has outpaced the American government once again. The Omicron variant has taken over from the previous variants. Long queues are expanding outside testing centres across the country. The isolation period for infected patients has been reduced, and the promised free rapid home test kits are nowhere to be seen. The announcement of 500 million home test kits was the highlight of Joe Biden's aggressive fight against the virus. President Biden came on television to deliver on his efforts and made several promises just before Christmas. Ahead of New Year's Eve, anxious Americans are now facing a surge in new cases, and the easy access free home kits are not scheduled to arrive until next month. This is what Joe Biden had to say on his failure to deliver on promises.
It's clearly not enough. If we'd known, we would have gone harder, quicker if we could have. Because steps we have to be taken to increase the number of authorized tests, we're now able to purchase 500 million at-home rapid tests to be sent to the American people for free when they request it. And we're going to continue to use the Defense Production Act to produce as many tests as possible. And starting in 2 weeks, private insurance will reimburse you for the cost of at-home tests. We're providing access to free tests for folks who don't have insurance. But we have to do more. We have to do better. And we will.
President Joe Biden held a virtual meeting with governors, and his message was not something they were hoping for. The governors were reminded of their responsibility for combating the crisis. Biden pledged the full support of the federal government, but asked the governors to solve the crisis themselves.
Look, there is no federal solution. This gets solved at a state level. My message to the governor is simple. If you need something, say something. And we're going to have your back in any way we can. Seeing how tough it was for some folks to get a test this weekend shows that we have more work to do.
Biden denounced the lack of testing during the Trump administration, calling it a colossal failure of planning, leadership and execution. Today, the Omicron variant has caught the White House off guard. Cases have far outstripped the government's ability to make tests available on time. The isolation period for infected patients has now been cut down to 5 days. And when he was asked about the meeting with the governors, Joe Biden said this.
What did the governors tell you they're worried about?
Well, they didn't tell me worried, but they thanked me for the cooperation they're getting. They said they've gotten all that they need.
Negotiations on the nuclear deal with Iran have begun in Vienna. This is the 8th round of talks. World powers are trying to save the landmark Iran nuclear deal, while diplomats have warned of some difficult work ahead.
An eighth round of talks aimed at salvaging the Iran nuclear deal kicked off in Vienna on Monday. Tehran has maintained its focus on one side of the original 2015 bargain, demanding sanctions against it be lifted. They've also refused to meet directly with U.S. officials, forcing the deal's remaining parties to shuttle between the two sides. Little remains of the original deal. It had lifted sanctions on Iran in exchange for restrictions on its nuclear activity. Then U.S. President Donald Trump pulled out of the deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions. That prompted Tehran to breach and even exceed many of those nuclear restrictions. The previous round of talks ended a little over a week ago after adding some new Iranian demands, with Western powers warning that time was running out for negotiations. Iran insists all U.S. sanctions must be lifted before steps are taken on the nuclear side, while Western negotiators say both demands must be balanced. U.S. sanctions have slashed Iran's oil exports, its main source of revenue. Tehran does not disclose data, but shipping assessments suggest a fall from around 2.8 million barrels per day in 2018 to a fraction of that volume, as low as 200,000.
The United States and Russia have scheduled talks in Geneva next month. The focus will be on nuclear arms control, Ukraine tensions, and Russia's list of security guarantees. According to reports in Russian media, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, has said that talks on security assurances and the Ukraine conflict will top the agenda of the Moscow-Washington bilateral. The West is alarmed over Russia's build-up of troops along the Ukraine border. Though Russia says it will not invade Ukraine, it has asserted facing threat from its neighbour. Many perceive this as a Russian attempt to create a pretext for invasion. In a video call earlier this month, US President Joe Biden warned Putin that Russia will face severe consequences if it attacks Ukraine. Russia published its security demands to raise the pressure on the United States and its allies to negotiate a security deal. And ahead of the engagement, Russian President Vladimir Putin has indicated that he is considering a slew of options if the West fails to meet his push for security guarantees. When asked to specify what Moscow's response could be, Putin said that it will depend on military proposals.
Но я надеюсь, что все-таки и мы же не для того, чтобы что-то забаллотировать и что-то прекратить с точки зрения этого дипломатического процесса предложили, а для того, чтобы достичь дипломатического переговорного результата, закрепленного, как я уже говорил, юридически в рамках тех документов, которые мы предложили.
Russia is fiercely opposed to Ukraine's inclusion in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Last week, Russia unveiled its wish list of security proposals. The list includes the demand of NATO to give up any military activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. Russia also wants NATO to roll back its military deployments in Central and Eastern Europe. The US and its allies have refused to offer Russia the kind of guarantees that Putin wants on Ukraine. The West cited NATO's principle that membership is open to any qualifying country. Moscow and NATO representatives are now expected to meet on January the 12th, while parallel, broader discussions are also set to be held between Russia and the OSCE regional security body. The meeting will take place on January the 13th. Amid the standoff between Russia and Western powers, Russian forces have held military exercises to practice repelling a massive airstrike. About 1,000 troops took part in the operation. Moscow also considers the threat of a new missile crisis as serious. Ukraine is preparing itself against the Russian troop build-up near its border. Russia is said to have massed more than 100,000 of its troops along the border with Ukraine since the middle of November. And this has created a real possibility of conflict in the near term. And Ukraine is readying itself now for the worst.
Ukraine is preparing for the worst. On the face of it, Russia has denied planning an invasion into Ukraine. But the facts on the ground contradict the statements given by Moscow. More than 100,000 well-armed Russian troops have been moved to locations along the Ukrainian border. And events can escalate very quickly. At this forested area just outside Kiev, civilians are joining Ukraine's armed reserve forces to fight against the Russians in the event of a ground invasion.
I believe that we will have a chance to win against the opponent who outweighs us in strength and weaponry if every single person is ready to defend our land. The risks of a full-scale invasion or continuation of the hybrid war are quite high now.
Dressed in combat fatigues, civilians are being trained with mock smoke grenades and Kalashnikovs to take on the Russian soldiers. The training is rigorous and the danger of imminent live combat is all too real. In case the front defense lines break, Ukraine wants its civilians to be prepared for combat in its cities.
I have been living with the thought that until we give Russia a good blow in the face, they will not leave us alone for 8 years. They always finish the weak. If we do not resist, this invasion will keep going for a long time.
Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 made Ukraine learn a bitter lesson. These trainees here are part of the reservist battalions set up to protect Kiev. Ukraine presently has more than 215,000 troops in its army. It is already battling a Moscow-backed insurgency. In two breakaway regions since 2014, in a long simmering conflict that has claimed more than 13,000 lives. In the event of another war, besides its regular soldiers, Ukraine wants to have 100,000 fighting force in reserve. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
There's a street market in Turkey which only has women vendors. It was started to help victims of violence and has enjoyed a buoyant trade for a long time. But this market is now facing a consumer crisis. Our next report tells you why.
This is Turkey's first women-only street market in the Kurdish southeastern city of Diyarbakir. It opened in 2013 to provide jobs for victims of violence. The market and women vendors enjoyed a buoyant trade in its early years. The happier days saw over 250 women making a living by selling their wares at the street market. Now, the number of vendors has come down to 69. And this women-only street market is hit by a growing consumer crisis. The business is shrinking dramatically due to a currency crisis. The lira has lost as much as 48% of its value in the past 2 months alone. The lira crash has sent prices soaring and ravaged household budgets.
We can see the sales have come to a complete standstill. People's purchasing power is almost completely gone, as is their selling power. Everyone has given up, but no one says anything.
The lira crisis has prompted the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, to push for lower interest rates. This despite a sharp increase in inflation and warnings from economists.
The dollar was 18.6 lira on Monday evening, 2 days ago. How did it fall to 12.2 lira in 40 minutes? If the government could intervene, why did they wait 3 months, 4 months?
Last week, the government unveiled a deposit protection plan. The state backed a series of market interventions by selling billions of dollars. And the lira staged a sharp rebound. But the women vendors are not impressed.
I have been doing this job for 9 years. The previous earnings and the current earnings are not the same. We are currently making money that would only cover the cost for shipping in plastic bags. There are days we don't even make 20 lira.
The Turkish currency, the lira, remains vulnerable, and so does the living standards of people. Annual inflation at 21% is expected to jump 30% next year. Apart from this, import prices are already soaring, and retailers are hard to put to cover the rising goods, energy and labour costs Due to the economic condition of Turkey, people are still struggling to buy even basic food items.
In the evening, bread costs 4 liras, and in the morning, it becomes 7 liras. People are stumped and don't know what to do. The financial situation has become very difficult, and we live in a very troubled system today.
Bureau Report, WION World is One.
It has taken just 11 days and a bit for Australia to pummel England into submission and retain the Ashes. We use the word pummel advisedly, as nothing else can really explain England's capitulation this morning in Melbourne. They trailed by just 82 runs after the first innings, but somehow managed to lose by an entire innings.
Absolutely gutted. Bitterly disappointed. We're bitterly disappointed to find ourselves in this position. And we need to put some pride back into the badge. And we need to give people back home something to celebrate and look fondly back on from this tour. It's bitterly disappointing to be a 3-0 down. But
strong words from England captain Joe Root, who had a ringside view of the three Lions falling over like dominoes on Tuesday morning. At 31 for 4, the situation was dire. But Root and 2019 Ashes hero Ben Stokes were at the crease.
It's a lovely punch down the ground. No need to run Ben Stokes, and he doesn't.
The semblance of a fight was expected. Oh! England, though, surrendered without a fight.
Edge taken! The England skipper!
It was a swift and brutal end to their Ashes campaign. Scott Boland lived up to his reputation as an MCG demon, as he picked up 6 wickets for just 7 runs to bowl England out for 68. Their lowest total in Australia in over a century. Barely a month after being appointed captain, Pat Cummins had the distinction of joining a list of Australian greats who had led the country to Ashes glory.
Pat Cummins is going to be that lucky guy that gets those.
I grew up in the backyard watching, Steve Waugh, Ricky Ponting, those guys win Ashes series. It felt a million miles away from me playing cricket in the backyard, and here I am. A decade later, in that position. It's madness. I think we've got 7 players in the top 10 in the world at the moment, 4 batters, 3 bowlers. And we probably haven't strung the performances over the last couple of years that we probably expected ourselves. So I think this really consolidates that we are, a really good, strong Test cricket side.
The scenes of celebration at the MCG are in sharp contrast to the tumultuous build-up for the Australians. The euphoria of a maiden T20 World Cup title was punctured by Tim Paine's sudden resignation and Cummins' elevation. But, pushed to a wall, the famed tough-as-nails mentality shone through. Cummins led from the front in the first test, as England were bowled out for 147 on day 1 in Brisbane. Those scars never healed.
It's moments like these where everyone's clicking, everyone's playing really well. That's what you want to really make the most of. So 2 more test matches, home conditions. A few of the guys were part of that whitewash series, the 5-0 in 2013-14. A few more in the 4-0 last series. So, there's a lot to kind of look back on, but we'll savour this one, and then once we get to Sydney, we'll be back on the tools.
That whitewash doesn't seem too far-fetched at the moment. England have earned the dubious record of losing 9 tests in 2021, equaling a mark set by a fledgling Bangladesh in 2003. 50 England batters registered ducks over the course of 15 tests this year, and the average of runs scored per batter is below 25. The 3 Lions have not won a test in Australia since January 2011. That's a run of 13 consecutive games, which is also a new low. There was just one positive for England in 2021, the form of captain Joe Root. The Yorkshiremen made 1,708 runs in 15 tests, and that is the third highest by any player in the history of the game. Those numbers, though, may not be enough to ensure his continuation in the hot seat, with the calls for his head growing louder.
I can't be selfish and start thinking about myself. I think more than anything, we've got to keep looking to do everything we can to get the players in the best possible place to go and win test matches. And that's a big part of captaincy. You've got to ready the players, you've got to try and instill that belief in every single one of you, of your team and your squad. And more than ever now going into these last two games.
The early finish at the MCG gives England more than a week to gather their wits following this mauling. A COVID outbreak within the touring party isn't going to lead to a change in mood as the new year approaches. Having gambled by making 4 changes for the Melbourne game, England are now left with no chips to cash in. Sports Bureau, WION, World is One.
Well, that's all we've got time for today. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thanks as always for watching.
There are many other officials, right? Arab?
नमस्कार। दिवाली की शॉपिंग और ट्रैवलिंग से जनता की गाड़ियों पर काफी असर पड़ा है। गाड़ियों पर डेंट, स्क्रैचेस और वेयर एंड टेयर भी देखने को मिल रहा है। लेकिन घबराने की कोई बात नहीं। गो मैकेनिक, भारत की नंबर 1 कार सर्विस ऐप टॉप क्वालिटी कार सर्विसेज पर आपको दे रही है भारी छूट। तो देर ना करें और आज ही डाउनलोड करें।
Book now and get flat 500 off. Go Mechanic.
नमस्कार। दिवाली की शॉपिंग और ट्रैवलिंग से जनता की गाड़ियों पर काफी असर पड़ा है। गाड़ियों पर डेंट, स्क्रैचेस और वेयर एंड टेयर भी देखने को मिल रहा है। लेकिन घबराने की कोई बात नहीं। गो मैकेनिक, भारत की नंबर 1 कार